As I turned the corner, he was bringing a shotgun to bear about 10 inches away from my face. And while this was going on, one of the neighbors could hear the fight going on, and she called 911 and said, "Hey, I think your deputy could use some help." My name is Donnie Pridemore, Sr. I've been a police officer since 1987, I believe, is when I actually started. Started off as a reserve deputy with the Peoria County Sheriff's Department, and then worked my way into a couple small agencies part-time before working my way into a full-time agency, which was the city of Galva, Illinois. From there, I went to the academy, went to the Police Training Institute, the University of Illinois, and worked there for 2 years full-time before accepting a position with the Rock Island County Sheriff's Department in 1991. I worked there from 1991 until 2004, where I left the department and I went to the city of Fulton Police Department. I worked there for another 15 years, I believe, before accepting a position with the Scott County Sheriff's Department in Iowa. And so a total of 35 years before I retired. Yeah, I grew up in a small town outside of Peoria, Illinois. My father passed away when I was 6 weeks old. So it was difficult. My mom raised myself and 4 siblings by herself, and it was a difficult childhood. As far as we didn't have any money, we lived pretty poor, but Mom did her best to make it the best that she could for us. But there was a lot of things she just couldn't provide. So I went to Princeville High School, is where I graduated from, and I stayed in that area for a while until I started seeking out law enforcement employment. I've always been interested in police work. It's really the only career field that I couldn't get out of my head. It's just always what I wanted to be. And I was always very looked up to the area law enforcement officers that I knew growing up as a kid. And I just knew that's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to be. And I did try going to college, but it was a tough thing for me to do. I just couldn't afford it. And so that's why I started my career with the Peoria County Sheriff's Reserve, and which gave me an opportunity to get some on-the-job training with the deputies and be able to go to in-service training to learn more about how to be a police officer, and took advantage of that the best I could, and managed to work that our way into part-time positions before I wound up full-time. Galva, Illinois. It's a small agency. I was working part-time for them when the full-time position came around, and I was given that position. I was sent to the Police Training Institute at the University of Illinois for my academy training. We had a total of 6 full-time officers there, again, very small. Worked night shift, just straight night shift. We worked as our own backup units. So every officer had a police radio installed in his personal car, and we were to kind of monitor the radio traffic when you were asleep at night, and if the on-duty unit called for assistance, you were to respond. So you had to always have your one ear kind of listening for the radio, and have clothes ready to jump into and to be able to respond as a backup unit to help that officer out. It was pretty unique. And we actually had to, if you were going out of town, you called out on the radio if you were off duty that you were going to be out of town, so the other officers knew that you wouldn't be available to serve as that backup unit. Working at the city of Galva was always a stepping stone. I always knew that I was going to go to a larger agency, get some time under my belt, and that opportunity came just within a couple of years, where I was hired by the Rock Island County Sheriff's Department. My I'd never been to the Quad Cities when I was hired there, and working third shift, both my interviews were in the morning, and my girlfriend, now wife, drove me to both those interviews. And at what point the administrators at the sheriff's department actually asked this, you do have a driver's license, right? And it was kind of funny because they'd seen her driving me, and I explained, well, I worked third shift, I was up all night, and so she drove me here, and they got a big kick out of it. But I was hired there, and I started in 1991, and the first few years was great. I did get into, within the first year, there was a pretty serious incident. I was on third shift patrol, and I was dispatched to a domestic violence, and it was clear out almost to the next county. And normally, this was at a time when we did not have take-home squad cars at that point. And when one shift was coming in off duty, the next shift was coming on for briefing. There would be at least one car that came out, we called the early car. So they were to handle any emergencies that came up until the rest of the shift came out. Well, unfortunately, that car was tied up on a traffic crash, so I was sent to this domestic by myself. Normally we wouldn't do that, except the female caller had said that the male half had left the residence. So we didn't see a big problem with it. But upon arrival, quickly learned that he had not left the residence, and this thing turned bad pretty quickly. As I arrived on the scene, it was a little town called Reynolds, Illinois, and the male part came out, and he threw a big bag of charcoal briquettes at his girlfriend. And of course, right then I went hands-on with him, and the struggle began. And he lived in a upstairs apartment with a long staircase going up. And as I grabbed him and started to get him into custody, he slipped out and went running up the stairs, which in pursuit of. Unfortunately, our radio system at that time was pretty antiquated, and when I was calling to get other units to come out there, and it's probably a 20-minute ride just to get from Rock Island out to where I was at, but nobody could hear my radio transmissions. So as I got to the top of the stairs, the fight was on, and this guy was hyped up on crack cocaine and alcohol that we found out later. So as I began to struggle with him and fight him, I wound up fighting him pretty much in every room in the house. And my uniform was pretty much shattered, destroyed, pieces of it in this room, pieces of it in another room. I got him into he tried to get into the bathroom, getting away from me. And at that point, I had picked him up and put him through the shower doors. And he bounced up out of the tub and came at me again. And I kicked him in the privates, which did get his attention, but very little, because he just backed up and he said, "Now it's your turn," and trying to do the same to me. So then we spilled out into the living room portion, it would be, and I had him pinned up against the wall, and he was fighting, and I pushed him through the drywall. And then we wound up into a bedroom. So the fight continued into the bedroom, and at what point I had picked him up and slammed him across the foot of the bed, splintered it into pieces, but the guy was feeling no pain. His pain sensors were dulled from the narcotics, and he just wasn't reacting to the pain as well he should have. So as I was trying to control him and wrestle with him, pretty sweaty and hot at that time, and he slipped out from me, and he went running back into the living room area. And as I turned the corner, things kind of went into slow motion at that point. As I turned the corner, he was bringing a shotgun to bear about 10 inches away from my face. And instinctively, I grabbed the barrel of the shotgun and pinned him back up against the wall. At this point, I used my forehead, and I smashed my forehead into his, and I put his head through the drywall, and we were both locked onto that shotgun. And while this was going on, one of the neighbors could hear the fight going on, and she called 911 and said, "Hey, I think your deputy could use some help." And at that point, the third shift was in their briefing, and they just sent everybody. Everybody went running out, getting squad cars and heading out there. And they called the early car off his crash and sent him my way. So as we continued to struggle, we were at the top of the steps again, fighting over the shotgun. And I just remember both of us tumbling all the way down the stairs and wounding up back at the foot of the stairs, and we're both clutched onto that shotgun. The early car unit arrived, and he got out, and at the time we carried these big mag lights, or about, big 4D cells, and the deputy's name was Hurley, and Hurley came out and saw us struggling over the shotgun, and he just starts teeing off with that big mag light, but it wasn't phasing this guy. He was just not feeling any pain at all. So finally, the rest of third shift arrives, and just finally get that shotgun pried away from him, and they're still fighting him and trying to get him cuffed up, and we finally wound him, hog-tying him and getting him in custody, and EMS was called to the scene, and my heart rate was so high because I fought him for 15 minutes, and that might not seem like a long time to most people, but that's going hand to hand for 15 minutes. That's a challenging workout. And my heart rate was so high, they headed me to the hospital, and I wound up being fine, but it was a pretty hairy situation at the time. So I was sent to the Police Training Institute at the University of Illinois, when we actually stayed in a dorm. They had a dorm that was for the law enforcement students there, and which was pretty good for the most part, except for sometimes the actual college students that were in the same dorms. They like to do things like send an elevator up to our floor and throw a string of firecrackers in there in the middle of the night to try to keep us awake, things like that. Just things you had to deal with there. But we would get up in the mornings and do our PT, and we had a National Guard armory that was close. So we would start our PT in there, and we would run the track for a while in formation, and then move out to outside. And there was a large park that we would run around. And I think our first day we ran 4.5 miles. Now, I'm not a runner. Matter of fact, I detest running, and I had shin splints, terrible shin splints for the first 8 weeks of the academy before they finally went away and didn't have that. But it didn't matter. You just ran with your shin splints, and dealt with it. But I really enjoyed the academy, and there was certain things. I took a real interest in the interview and interrogation parts of the academy. And again, this is just they just give you a taste of all different facets of police work, and nothing. They don't have enough time to go into depth in any of it. But I always remembered really being fascinated by the interview and interrogation stuff. So that did come into play in my career later down the road. And when the academy was over, I was in the top 10% were nominated for their top award. I was one of the top 10%. And I was actually, at 30 years old, 29 years old, something like that, I was one of the oldest people. I was the old man at the academy. Nowadays that's not the case. But I was one of the older guys at the academy, and I was glad that I was in that. I didn't get that award, but I was one of the guys eligible for it. So, I stuck it out. One of the things we did, we boxed. You had to fight everybody in the academy at some point. And you started to learn how the schedule was going to go, so you knew who you were going to fight the next day. We had a guy from a Chicago suburb. We called him Big Ray. Big Ray's arms were about the size of my chest and big around. He was just a hulking, massive, very strong guy. Super nice, like a gentle giant, but when you knew it was your turn to fight Big Ray, you weren't going to have a good day. All right, so I knew my day was coming, and that morning I got up and I'm psyching myself up, man, I'm just going to try to get in there. I'm going to try to move, try not let him contact me. You know, get in there, got our headgear on, we got our gloves on. They blow the whistle and me and Ray go at it. Well, my first recollection is he hit me so hard my headgear spun around and I hit the floor. And the next thing I know, they were pulling my headgear off, and Big Ray's standing over the top of me. So, are you okay? You know, he had that deep voice, and I don't ever want to get hit that hard again. And I'm not sure, it was probably maybe 80% of his power, but I didn't last long with Ray. And so nobody did, but it was fun in retrospect, you know. But I really enjoyed the academy. When it was time to graduate, I didn't want to leave, and about had to force me out of there. So it was a good time. Well, because I had, when I got out of the academy, and I had had a couple of years of experience part-time and working as much as I possibly could, my experience was probably a little different than most. You know, I already had some street experience, and so it wasn't a lot different. I just had a better understanding of how the legal system worked and the laws, and got more formal education on that, and you know, what you could do, what you can't do, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, all that stuff. So it wasn't really a big turn for me at that point. When I left that department and I went to Rock Island County, I was with an FTO there for about 2 weeks. It was supposed to be a much longer structured PTO training time with your field training officer. But I came into the shift one night, and the shift lieutenant was looking at the manpower, and he says, "Hey, we're really short tonight." He says, "You think you're ready to be on your own?" And that was 2 weeks I had in a county I'd never been before, and I said, "Oh, hell no." And he said, "No, you'll be fine. You know, go ahead, you're on your own." So they kicked me loose out of the field training early. And there I was, I'd have a map in one hand, steering wheel in the other, trying to make sure I stayed in my county and was able to respond to my calls. And it was a quick lesson on geography. You know, you had to learn really quick when you were just basically thrown out there and handling calls without a nice, you know, FTO period. So it was stressful, but it worked out just fine. So my first few years with Rock Island County were great. I loved the department. I had already been put on the tactical team, and I was made it as a firearms instructor. Got sent to school as a firearms instructor, and I also was a Reconstructionist. So I was dispatched to a traffic crash one morning, and it was a fatality. And it was a young girl, 17 years old, who was on her way to high school, and she had her brother in the back seat and another schoolmate in the front seat. And they were heading east where the sun was coming up, and so the sun was really bright in her as she was heading into it. As she went around a curve, coming around the other way was a military semi with a B-52 simulator on it. The problem was she was on a very narrow county road, and the B-52 simulator actually stuck over into the other lane of traffic. So as she rounded the curve, with the sun in her eyes and this thing coming, she was decapitated by that B-52 simulator. So it was kind of a surreal experience with her, such a young girl, you know, dying like that, and the trauma of her, you know, her brother being in there witnessing this. And a patrol sergeant was handling the crash at the time because we didn't have any accident reconstructionists. They had called for a state accident reconstructionist to respond, but he was so far away, it was going to take so long, they decided to try to just get some basics down, and they let the semi drive away. Well, when the reconstructionist showed up at the scene, he was kind of mortified that they had let that semi go before he could get proper measurements and stuff. and they had to call, I think it was the state of Missouri where he had gotten to find him and to get him stopped so that they could do all the measurements of the correct measurements of the semi. And that crash led me to go ahead and I saw the need to be an accident reconstructionist. So they sent a few of us to the classes. I'm the only one that made it all the way through on that, and it was tough, but I was glad I did it. So a lot of my experiences from that point on were with fatal crashes and learning how to reconstruct those. So my career was going well with the Sheriff's Department, but I did run into an issue. One of my sergeants on night shift had did not get along with the sheriff or the chief deputy at all. And this was before my time, before I even hired there. And they were clearly, he was clearly on the blacklisted, they went on a witch hunt for him. And they would do things, discipline him for things that nobody else got disciplined for. It was really blatant. Well, one night I was dispatched to a domestic disturbance, and that particular sergeant was my backup unit. So we arrived at the residence to find out that the suspect in this was one of our correctional officers in the jail. So the sergeant made the decision that this should be handled by another agency and called for state police to come in to handle it so that there was no conflict of interest, which was the right way to handle this. So I wrote a report anyway. The sergeant wrote a report, was handed off to the state police, and it wasn't long later before I was called into the sheriff's office, where him and the high command were in there, and also an attorney that was not a prosecuting attorney, this was more of a private attorney out of Chicago, was in there, and they started to question me on the call. Well, it became evident that they were going to go after the sergeant for what they deemed to be a mishandling of the call by kicking it over to the state police and not handling it ourselves. So as they were asking me questions, they were trying to get me to say that the sergeant did things that he shouldn't have, and it wasn't. I had no problem with the way the sergeant handled the situation. But they kept asking questions, and one of the questions was does the sergeant do anything that you think is wrong? And just to try to come up with something off the top of my head, I said, well, I think he uses too much radio traffic. I mean, the grand scheme of things, that is a very, very tiny complaint, right? But clearly they wanted me to say something that I didn't agree with. So when I left there, and it wasn't long after that they terminated the sergeant and used this call as the basis for his termination. And he was out of work for a year and a half, I think, something like that, stocking shelves at a grocery store at night, and as this thing went through the court system. So it came down to a hearing in front of an administrative law judge, and once again I'm called in to testify as a witness against the sergeant. The same attorney that had questioned me before about it starts asking me a bunch of questions again, trying to get me to say that that things that the sergeant may have done wrong. And he finally asked this question. He said, "What professional problems do you have with Sergeant Huff?" And he didn't use that word professional the first time he asked me. And I didn't deem this to be a professional problem. And I said, I don't have any professional problems with Sergeant Huff. And he starts screaming at me that he's going to impeach me as a hostile witness. And, you know, the sheriff is there, the chief deputy's there. At that point, I knew this was going to be really detrimental to my career. And I explained, I said, well, the attorney asked, he said, "Did I not ask you this same question?" I said, "No, sir, you did not." I said, "You asked me before if I had any personal opinions on the way a sergeant conducted himself on duty, but when you threw the word professional in there, that changed the question. And I was then removed from the stand, and it became pretty evident that my career was probably going to go nowhere at that point. So as my time at the Sheriff's Department went on, I was just hoping to wait it out for another administration to come in, but that never happened. And I was passed over for promotion, I think 8 times. And for people that had nowhere near the training and experience, I had zero discipline at all. And yet then they started going after me because I owned a small business. And I at first had permission to own the small business, and then they took that away and started just chipping away and taking things away from me. And things went downhill pretty quickly after that. And it came to a head where they were going to try to discipline me for owning the business. And at that point, I said, "Oh, I'm done here," and I resigned. So that's when I wound up going to the city of Fulton. So we had a deputy that at the Rock Island County that lived in the city of Fulton, and he knew the police officers there and was good friends with the chief. And he had told the chief that I had just resigned, and he knew that they were really looking hard to try to find an experienced officer to come on their staff. So they had contacted me and wanted to know if I would come in for an interview. At the time, I wasn't sure if I was even interested in it. You know, it was a 30-mile drive from my house to there, and I just was waiting to do some testing and stuff from some of the closer in agencies, bigger agencies. But I went ahead and went in and had 2 good interviews with the chief. The city administrator came in, and they told me with my training and experience that they were going to up the pay to try to get me to take the job, and so I took it. And it actually worked out better than I thought. So I was, within 2 years, I was promoted to sergeant, and then 2 years after that, I was promoted to lieutenant, and then put into the investigation position. And so my career there, I have no complaints whatsoever. It worked out really well. We were in an interesting location. We were right on the Mississippi River, right across from Clinton, Iowa. And we worked very closely with the Clinton, Iowa guys. We dealt with the same people. And I was put on the tactical team there and made it to assistant team leader. And so I had my tactical experience going from Rock Island County, transferred right over to the city of Clinton. It's a multi-jurisdictional tactical team. And so I got that, and I finally got into being a detective, and went into some more schools, for more interview interrogation schools, and I got to be known pretty good as an interrogator. And I was asked by other agencies to do work for them, to do some interviewing and interrogations on their behalf. So I was pretty happy with that. I really went hard after child predators. And that was an interesting situation as an interrogator, because it wasn't for everybody. Because you had to be able to put yourself on the same level as them to get them to talk to you. And it's an uncomfortable place to be, and it's not something everybody can do. I understood the assignment, and I got pretty good at it. I got a high volume of confessions that a lot of other detectives in the county would really struggle with, and to the point where the state's attorney had called me into his office and asked if I would be interested in going and training all the other detectives from the other agencies on how I get these confessions. I didn't feel like I could do that, because I think it's just something either you can do or you can't do. It's one of those things that it's hard to try to teach somebody how to do. It's just something that you're going to have that natural knack, or it's just not going to work for you. So I didn't do that, but I was pretty flattered that he asked me to do it. I was working third shift, and we got a call of a subject on an area we call Big Island, which is it's an island out on by the river where people go out there all the time and they party it up and fish and stuff like that. So we're used to going out there for, you know, people doing stupid things and getting injured, what have you. Well, it was like 7 o'clock in the morning into shift, and fire had gone out there, report of an injured subject, and when they got there, they found he had a gunshot wound. So I get dispatched to this call, and what's going through my mind at that point is, oh, a bunch of idiots out there playing with guns, and somebody probably, you know, got shot, and it's almost the end of my shift. You know, I'm thinking, well, great, I'm going to be on overtime, you know, and I roll up to this, to the ambulance there, and I crawl in the back, and his gunshot wound is through his neck, through the back and through the front, and he's trying getting the bleeding under control. He's hard to hear, obviously, with the injury, but he indicates that his buddy is still down at Lock and Dam 14. So I go down there to try to find his buddy, and I find his buddy's body face down with a gunshot wound to the back of the head. So this is a homicide and an attempted homicide. What had happened was these two gentlemen were at a party, and they met some other guys there. And the other guys said, hey, we're going to go to this other, out on Big Island, and we're going to get some beer. We're going to meet some girls out there. Do you guys want to come along? Well, sure, of course they do. Well, what they didn't know had happened was these three guys were talking, and one guy was bragging about how he could kill people. And they said, bull crap, show us that you can do it. So sure enough, they lure him out there to this camping area, fishing area. He pulls out a .22 revolver, makes them both kneel down, and executes both of them. But the one kid just played dead. He was hit low and went through his neck and just missed his spinal cord. But he laid down there and played dead until they left, and then he walked like a mile trying to control the bleeding before he got help. So we had a homicide there, and I went through the pockets of the deceased, and I found a receipt where beer was bought, and we were able to, you know, all the detectives were called out, and we were able to go to pull video from the liquor store and stuff and eventually ID the other guys involved, and by 1 o'clock that afternoon, everybody's in custody. So it went pretty well, but it was, you know, my first homicide, and that's always pretty memorable too, you know, and so there was that one. Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a couple of them. One of them was a serial rapist that I had one victim over in the city of Fulton, and he'd also struck over in the city of Clinton, and I was working with their detectives on the case. We were trying to identify this guy before things got even worse. Well, we were getting close. We had finally got some video from somebody's front door, but you know, at this time the video wasn't nearly as good as it is now, and we were able to make out, you know, not even a full plate, but license plate, and just some dark images and stuff. But we were getting somewhere. But tragically, he struck again, and this time when he struck again, he stabbed the mother to death, and then set the apartment on fire, which killed the 2-year-old that she also had in there. So that one struck me pretty hard because I felt that we were just getting really close to be able to get this guy, and before something like this happened, and we were too late. So he's been convicted of the 2 murders, and he's going to be in prison the rest of his life in Iowa. Well, they finally, when the killing of the mother and the child happened, they were able to get more evidence to point to them who the suspect was, and we knew it was the same MO. We knew that he was responsible for others, but we had a lack of evidence really, because he wore masks. He knew to wore gloves. He was covering his tracks pretty well, and he was avoiding places where there might be cameras or witnesses, things like that. He chose his victims pretty well. He's made it tough to catch him. And we had a gentleman and his wife, James Jackson was his name. They had moved into town, and they'd opened an ice cream and coffee shop in town, and they had a female named Michelle working for them, which is nothing here or there. But we started getting reports that something was amiss. And nothing we could really investigate. We didn't have a complainant really, just chatter from people that he was up to something. Well, I got a call from a law firm in Davenport, Iowa that represented this Michelle, her ex-husband. And she had apparently told him that she was being sexually abused by this couple. They had taken her in under their wing, and that they gave her $50,000 to pay for her divorce attorney, and were using that against her, and that he is controlling and manipulating her and threatening that he will harm her family if she doesn't go along with the things they want her to do. And the attorney sent me over some depositions and such where they had taken, where the same sort of thing had happened in another state with this guy. So I started looking into it, and I couldn't get Michelle. I would try to get her separate to try to get her to talk to me, and she refused, would not talk to me. And things started progressing when they then hired a 16-year-old girl to also work, and I was concerned for her safety. Her name was Paula. And I would finally learned that Michelle had finally broken away from this couple, and she was working in a medical clinic in Bettendorf, Iowa. So I contacted her and asked her if she would agree to meet with me. And she was very emotional and said if I came there, as long as I was in an unmarked squad card and nobody could tell that I was a police officer, that she would come and talk to me, and she would have her supervisor present. So great. So I go in and I talk to her, and it was really hard to listen to. She was being taken advantage, sexually abused, and videotapes being taken, and where she was forced to have sex with both the Jacksons, the male and his wife, and that they had threatened to murder her family, all kinds of things to try to keep her under control. They had slowly manipulated her by giving her things, providing for her, and finally getting her under their control. And that's how they managed to do it. But she had finally managed to slip out, break away, and that's where she was. I had enough there to go get a search warrant and for the shop, because he lived in an apartment above this ice cream shop. So it was on a Friday that I got the interview with her, and over the weekend I typed everything up. I typed up the search warrant, affidavits, had everything ready, and was getting ready to go to the state's attorney's office Monday morning. Monday morning came, and as I was heading out the door, Michelle calls. And she's panicked, she's crying, and she's refusing to go any further with the investigation. She's scared to death that Jackson is going to be able to get her for talking to me. I went to the state's attorney's office anyway with it, and unfortunately, without a cooperative witness, they weren't going to give me the search warrants and such. So I didn't abandon the case. I kept up with it, because now they had a 16-year-old girl that they had gotten temporary custody of, and I was afraid they were going to repeat this with her. And Michelle told me that, yeah, they're going to do the same thing to her. So during this time, the principal of the high school had reached out to me and said, hey, we've got this Paula in the school, and she's being controlled by this James Jackson. She has to have her cell phone with her at all times. She can't sit with the other students. We're not allowed to talk to her unless he's present. And she has to sit away from all the other students at lunch hour, and she has to be on the phone with him. And clearly things were not right. I had tried to get Jackson to come in and interview me, but he was avoiding me. So next thing we know, he's got Paula running for mayor, a high school girl. And so he's trying to get leverage and control of city government by trying to get her elected as the mayor, which was very, very strange. But as he became aware that I was investigating him, they pulled up and moved, took Paula with them, and they wound up in Oklahoma. So I contacted FBI out of Rockford, and I also had one of the investigator from Illinois State Police come and meet with me, and I said, hey, listen, here's this case, here's what he's doing. If Michelle wouldn't have backed out, I probably had enough to at least get a search warrant and possibly an arrest warrant. And now he's moved to Oklahoma. I need somebody else to take over this investigation. And the FBI took the case file, and they did get back to me and said, well, at that point, they weren't sure what else they could do with it. So time went on, and I was, it bothered me a lot because I knew what was probably going to be happening to this girl. So then I became aware that they had all moved to I think Wetumpka, Oklahoma, a small town in Oklahoma, where he ran for mayor and was elected mayor. And his wife was on the city council. And they still had Paula. They called Paula their daughter, which she wasn't. And that's the way things were going for a while. And eventually things took a turn. So we had I had left my job at the city of Fulton and went to the Scott County Sheriff's Department. And I was in a nationally televised murder trial that was moved. It was a 40-year-old case that was solved through DNA of a high school girl who was stabbed to death and had gone unsolved in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa area. So once they finally figured out who their suspect was, made him arrest, they moved the whole trial because of publicity to Scott County. And this was all televised live, the whole trial, and with Dateline they were shooting episodes. Myself and another bailiff deputy were assigned to the killer, and that was our job, to be with him in the court, outside of court, take him over, do all that. So we were sitting in court, live TV streaming, and at that time I had an app on my phone that was geography based, so not supposed to ring when I'm at court. Well, the phone starts to ring in my pocket. And I'm kind of in a panic. This is on live television. Because to make matters worse, my ringtone was the theme from the Halloween movies. And this is in a murder trial where a girl was stabbed to death. All of a sudden the Halloween theme starts playing on my phone. So I quick reach down, and I'm trying to shut the phone off. And my partner sitting next to me says, was that your phone? I said, yeah. It's not supposed to be ringing. I don't know what's going on, So a few minutes later, it starts to ring again. I was ready for it. Shut it off again. So we take it was a recess, and we take the killer back out and put him in a holding cell. And I go out to see what's going on, and I have a phone call from Oklahoma. So I called the number back, and the answer is FBI, Oklahoma City. I said, hey, this is who I am. Do you have somebody trying to contact me? I said, hold on, we'll check with the agents. So one of the agents then gets on the phone and he says, hey, been trying to reach you in this case that you started. Things have progressed. And so we need to talk to you. I said, yeah, about that. I said, my phone's got an app that it's not supposed to ring in court. I'm in a nationally televised murder trial, and you made my phone ring, and it happened to be the Halloween theme song. So he's just dying laughing. He thinks it's the funniest thing ever. I said, man, I am petrified that I'm waiting for the sheriff to call me into the office, chew my butt over it. But he said, well, listen, sorry about that, but this case, this James Jackson case, has taken a turn. The girl has come forward and said she's being sexually abused by this couple. So we need to interview you on this case to get your information. So it was the whole thing, and finally the arrests were made, and James Jackson is now in prison. His wife was in prison and has already been released. And I felt terrible that Paula, wasn't able to get her out of that situation before they really started taking advantage of her. Because it was a tough case to work when you don't really have a cooperative witness. I always had when I would do traffic stops, I was always bluntly honest with people, and I always, that's the way to go. And I made this traffic stop, and I could smell cannabis on this guy. So, I just told him, I said, hey, look, you just got, some cannabis on you. Rather than make me go try to find it, if you just voluntarily give it to me, I'm just going to take it over here in the side of the road and dump it out and let you stomp it into the dirt, and we'll be good there. And he looked at me kind of sheepishly, and he said, really, you would do that? I said, yeah, I'll give you my word. I won't charge you with it. So he says, okay. And he reaches down the front of his pants and pulls out a half a pound of cannabis. So I instantly regretted what I had told him, but I'm a man of my word. And I just stood there because he's got felony amounts of cannabis. I wasn't expecting that. I'm thinking, a little dime bag or something. And he pulls out this big bag of dope, and I'm like, oh no. So true to my word, I said, well, I'll never say that again. I will never make that offer again. But we took it over there and spread it out, and I had him stomp it in there, and man, I regretted that from that time forward. I never said that again. Another stop I made, I actually had a ride-along with me. And a gentleman was Russian, and he has a Russian wife in the car, and he had his proper passports, and looking, and so I was just curious. I said, so what brings you here? And he said, I'm a magician from Russia. I said, really? And he says, do you want to see some magic? I said, absolutely, I want to see some magic. So there we were on the side of the road in the interstate, him and his wife outside the car, and they're giving us a magic show, me and my ride-along, who just thought it was the best thing ever. And it was very good, very entertaining, so just not something you run across too much, So that stood out as a very interesting traffic stop. We were called out to, this was in Clinton, Iowa, and a nurse had gotten off duty at one of the hospitals, and she had been estranged from her boyfriend, and it was a bad breakup. And she had walked out, left, it's kind of a second shift, so about midnight, she's walking out to her car, and it's like in January, and it's really terrible out. It's blowing and drizzling and freezing, and there's snow on the ground. So she walks out to her car, opens the door, she gets a seat, and she's putting her purse in and stuff. The door's still open, and her former boyfriend walks up to her, waited for her, and with a shotgun, and shoots her at point blank range and kills her in the car. He then takes off, and using triangulation on his cell phone, we know he's clear out he's made his way clear across the county, and he's out in a kind of like a forest preserve area and stuff. So the tactical team is called, and we come in, get our briefing, we load up our van, and we go out to this area to try to find him. Well, we found some tracks in the snow going into this back towards a river, and it's quite a ways back there. And we already know he's got a long gun. He's already killed somebody. He's not afraid to use it. And we've got a huge perimeter set on this thing. We got deputies and police officers on all these roads, and we got this, I don't know how many square mile where he's contained in, but we don't know exactly where he's at. So we decide, team leaders, we decide that we're going to put together a team to go in and basically try to hunt this guy down. So I volunteered to go with the team, and there's, I think, 5 of us, while the rest stayed with the van and waited for us to, if we locate him, to come up. So we trudged through miles in really terrible weather conditions, and we've got our night vision, and we're going slow and methodical, and we go 50 yards or so and stop, scan. We didn't have because of the weather conditions, we couldn't put a helicopter up there to try to find him. So it's basically just going to be us. So we keep going, and finally light's coming up. It's 6 a.m. Sun's starting to come up, and catch a glimpse of his vehicle. It's down by the river, and we don't know if he heard us or maybe saw us, whatever. But we hear a shot. So we just kind of stay down under cover and kind of keep making our way slowly up to him. And he had taken his own life at that point. So that was the end of it. But that was that was a pretty, it was a long night. And, he did what he did. There was another one where we had a gentleman take his wife hostage in her place of employment. And this is also in Clinton, Iowa. And there was a slightly amusing part of this, because the guy's last name was also Pridemore. Now, there's not too many of us around there. We weren't related, but when the dispatch call came in that the suspect was holed up it was an employment agency, and it had his wife in there at gunpoint, and they said his name was Pridemore, the dispatchers kind of panicked and called my chief to make sure it wasn't me. So kind of amusing, but there we wound up setting up. I was in a sniper position at that point, and up on a roof, and we were at the back door, and we had an approach team that was staged close, and the negotiators are negotiating with him, trying to get him to release his wife. And at one point, the back door of this thing just blows open, and a person comes barreling out of there. Well, when you're posted up in a sniper position, and all of a sudden you've just got this body coming out, I quickly realized it was her, not him, and I yelled, "It's her, it's her!" So, got her out of there, and then he wound up committing suicide before we went in there. So that was another one. And within a week of that incident, we had a guy go into one of the grocery stores with an AR-15 and start firing rounds at people, and hold up in there. And so that week was pretty busy. So we did manage to get him into custody and sent him to prison over it, and nobody got hit. So that was a good outcome on that one. Sure. I mentioned that I went to accident reconstruction schools, and when you're fresh out of that, it was like 7 weeks. It's not one of those classes you go to and it's kind of fun. You're sitting around doing some stuff, and you get to go home maybe early, whatever. No, you had homework. I mean, it was intense. It was it was tough. That's why most guys drop out of it without finishing it. But I stuck it out and got through, and got through the classes, and I was waiting for my first one after being, deemed a Reconstructionist. And My first one happened to be a really bad one. So I was on my shift. I happened to be working the shift, and the call came of a serious crash. And my shift lieutenant was one of the first officers on the scene, and he immediately called for me to respond. I'm probably 30 miles away in a different zone, 2 zones up. So it's going to take me a while to get there, but boy, that adrenaline rush goes down. You know, it's going to be my first one, and at the time we didn't have total stations and the mapping stuff that does the scene for you. This is all going to have to be done freehand and the hard way. You know, measured and marked, and you're going to have to do all this stuff and make a scale drawing without the use of a computer program. I didn't have any of that stuff yet. So I arrived on the scene, and what I had was a pretty horrific scene. So I had a Camaro that was going around a large radius curve that dropped 2 tires off the side, went into a yaw as it came back on, and yawed sideways into an oncoming vehicle. At the point of the crash, the Camaro tears in 2, right at the dashboard. So the front half goes spinning off, the rear half rolls over with 1 passenger in it, and 2 people from the front seat are both dead in the ditch. The guy in the other car hit is pinned in, and he's in very critical condition, and they're trying to get him unpinned out of that car. So I've got 3 dead bodies there. I've got a car ripped in 2. I got a high speeds involved. So I started into this as my first one. It's really a heck of a crash to be doing for your first one, but I did get some help from from my instructors from the state police on it. But I remember doing a speed workup based on the yaw marks that the Camaro left on the scene. So when I did my speed workup based on the yaw marks, I came up with a speed of 96.69 miles an hour at impact. Well, I've got a picture of the front half of the car, the dashboard. I've got a picture of the speedometer right at 96 miles an hour. So it froze right there at that impact. So that's a pretty good indicator that my math went okay on that. But my biggest problem on that whole crash is, who's my driver? So I've got, you know, the one body that's in the back of the vehicle stayed there, back there. He's pinned in. That half rolled over. It's upside down. The front half did not. And I've got 2 bodies laying in the ditch to try to figure out who the driver is. So I use what's called body kinematics, where I was able to match up different parts of the car to injuries on the bodies to place who was in what position. So that was interesting, because the female was the driver, and she had a fractured leg up here at the top, and I was able to match this shifter, the automatic shifter, with causing that fracture. So that put her as the driver as she was ejected from the vehicle. So pretty tragic, but it was a huge crash scene, and it was stressful. But I got through it and got that one taken care of. So that was a pretty serious one. I had another one that was not a fatal. It was serious injuries, but it was as far as reconstructions goes, it was going to be a pretty easy one. I had a clear point of impact in 1 lane. The cars hit, call it driver to driver with rotation, and I get to do my thing at the scene, and I go to the hospital where both drivers are transported to. So I've got the names of, I know the driver of the van is the one who was in the wrong lane. Okay? So I get to the hospital, and I'm getting the information from the people involved, and I asked them if they'd done blood work and stuff. And said, yeah, this person has a BAC of, you know, a 0.14 or something like that. I said, wait a minute, which one? Well, the person who was in the correct lane was drunk. Now that threw a whole new wrench into he was in his correct lane, but was hit by somebody in his lane that was not drunk. So, yeah, that turned into an interesting case, you know. So that wound up going to civil trials, and I had to testify in, and that was a pretty interesting case. But yeah, the accident reconstructions, I have a whole folder full of those that I did. And one of the worst was a 14-year-old who we had reports that was walking in a 4-lane roadway at night, wearing all dark clothing, walking in the lanes of roadway. Several cars had, 55-mile-an-hour roadway had just missed him and had called in, hey, there's some kid walking in the roadway, he's gonna get hit. Well, he did. He was hit by one car and run over by another one. So the first one killed him anyway. The second one was inconsequential, but as I arrived on scene, it was pretty gruesome one. And as I arrived on scene, the deputies who were there shutting down the roadway, one was a new officer and a female, and as I'm getting the information to do my at-scene work and get photos of the body and what have you, I could tell she wasn't doing well. And I asked her, I said, are you okay? And she just shook her head no. And so we had her go sit in the squad car. It was really pretty hard, you know, as a new officer to see something like that. But I did doing my investigation, but I was struggling with why this kid was in the middle of that roadway, you know, not perceiving the danger. Well, toxicology came back, and long story short, he'd been huffing helium with a buddy and glue, and that had distorted his, 14 years old, and he just was walking in the middle of the road just like there was no issue, and somebody came along, hit him and killed him. And then there was one more I'll talk to you about. I was off duty, and I got called that there was a fatal crash, and it was clear at right on the county line with a neighboring county, but the crash was going to be ours to handle. So it was about 3 o'clock in the morning when I get the call. So I hurry up and throw my gear in my squad car and head down there. And I arrive on scene, and this is an older station wagon that had gone straight at a T intersection and straight into the ditch and impacted pretty hard. And I had a 16-year-old dead at the wheel. So lieutenant that's on the scene is kind of briefing me on what they got, that the newspaper person had come upon the car. And so I'm looking in the vehicle, and I've got my flashlight, and I'm looking at the windshield and the inside of the windshield, and it's broke. And I start getting a side view, and I asked the lieutenant, I said, where's the passenger at? The lieutenant says, well, there wasn't a passenger. I said, yes, there is. He said, what do you mean? I said, come here. So I start putting my flashlight on the edge of the glass, and you could see very short crew cut hair embedded into the glass. I said, and here's what happened. I said he couldn't get out of his door, passenger side door, so he crawled to the rear of the station wagon to try to get out, still couldn't get out, and then he crawled back to the front, and he went out the driver's side window to get out of the car. He said, are you sure about this? I said, yeah, I'm sure. He's out here, he's injured, he's bleeding, his head's hit the windshield. We got to find this kid. So we're combing all the roads, looking for him and stuff, and finally we get the body removed from the vehicle, and we go with the coroner to make death notification. Not my favorite thing to do in law enforcement, but something we have to do. So talking to the mother, and I said, hey, listen, I know this is a terrible time, but I have to ask you a question. Did your son have any friends with a very short crew cut? And she says, yeah, his friend Casey. I said, where does Casey live? She said, well, go a couple blocks down, turn. I said, okay, so myself and another Reconstructionist, we head over to this kid's house and knock on the door. Of course, by now it's going on 5 o'clock in the morning, and his mother opens the door. I identified myself. I'm, Deputy Pridemore. I'm an accident reconstructionist. We need to talk to your son. Is he here? And she says, well, yeah, he's asleep on the couch. He's been here all night. he hasn't been anywhere. And that's great. If he hasn't been anywhere, that's great. Good. Can we just talk to him real quick? And, she takes an attitude with us. Well, I suppose you have to go wake him up. So I walk over there and I pull back the covers, and here's this bloody kid on the couch. Of course, she starts screaming and yelling, and he kind of wakes up, and we get EMS coming for him, and he's got a broken leg, and so I finally get to the point where I can interview him. And they tell me what happened, and he's this kid's dad, their parents went to sleep. We got some beer, and we were out cruising, and he crashed into the ditch, and I said, okay, but how did you get home? He said, well, I couldn't get out of the car, so I crawled into the back trying to get out that way, and I couldn't get out, so I crawled back in, and I had to crawl out his window. I said, okay. I said, what was his condition at that point? He said, well, he told me he was probably going to be fine. I said, so he was alive? And Casey said, what, he's not now? I said, no. You left him there and he died. Why didn't you call for, how did you get home? So he said, well, I went to this farmhouse and they let me call somebody to come and get me. I believe they gave him a ride home. I said, you didn't tell anybody that you had an injured friend still in the car? You left him there? And we went through the Illinois law books and we couldn't find anything that we could charge him with on that. So he literally left his buddy there to die, and then went home, made it home with a broken leg and other injuries, and that was a bad case. It's been quite an evolution because, when I first started as a reserve with the Peoria County Sheriff's Department, I carried a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver, and semi-automatics were just kind of coming into favor at that point. And we had a big baton you carried on, we didn't have the ASP batons, the collapsibles, and you carried a big ASP baton, and our flashlights were giant 4D cell mag lights, and you didn't have cameras, you didn't have body cameras, you didn't have MDCs. It was really rudimentary compared to the way things are now. But as time went on, I quickly, as soon as I could switch over to semi-automatic firearm, I did so. And we didn't even, at that point, we didn't have shotguns in the cars, let alone rifles. And once I came into Rock Island County, and I was put in as a firearms instructor and sent to school, and I started lobbying really hard to get rifles in the cars. And I met a lot of resistance because the higher command were convinced that AR-15s would go through 10 houses before they stopped, and all this danger. And I'm trying to explain ballistics to them and how that wasn't true. But I had to fight that battle. And I think it was the shootout in Burbank, in California, or Hollywood, that finally got them to turn their attention to what I was telling them. And I finally got permission for deputies at the time to, they would have to buy their own rifle. I set up a qualification for it and started being able to carry rifles. But also during that time is when we started getting in-car cameras, the squad cars. And then after that came the MDCs, the mobile data computers in the car. Huge. I mean, now a police officer out in the street could do a lot of things himself in his squad car that he would normally have to run through dispatch, and it cut down on a lot of radio traffic. He could check warrants and things on and registrations, things like that on his own without having to go through there. And it really opened up a lot of more abilities for the police officer to conduct his investigations in the field and do things, especially when he could start doing reports on the computer. Because when I started, we hand wrote all reports. And if you struggled with that spelling and and things like that, you always got the red line. You'd throw your reports in the supervisor's box, and you'd come in the next day, and you had red lines through everything that had to be fixed. A lot of spelling errors, things like that. So I was when I was promoted to sergeant, I was pretty particular on reports. I didn't want to send those reports into state's attorney's office unless they were right. So I was pretty critical on that. But when we could start doing them on software on the MDCs and type in, and we had spell check, that sure made my life a lot easier also. So that as that equipment progressed, things got a lot better. When we finally started getting the body worn cams, that's also a huge benefit. When you can go back on your body camera to review a call you were just at, to help write your report, to get everything, what somebody was wearing, the chain of events, things like that, rather than just going off your memory, it makes for a better, more well-written report. Before body cameras came into vogue, we actually had a couple of the Clinton, Iowa officers that had bought their own body cameras and were wearing them, and this was, before all this happened. And we had a particular incident where two gentlemen were in a house doing some chemistry experiments without proper licensing, if you will. And this thing went bad, and the one grabbed a butcher knife and started stabbing his buddy, and he ran outside the door and collapsed on the front stoop. And the first officer on scene, she had her body camera on and turned on, and the tactical team was called out. And this was I think it was in December, and it was a super cold night. So I was dispatched to respond to that. And because we knew we had our suspect was still holed up in the house, but we were able to look at that body camera footage from the officer that first arrived on scene, and we could see kind of how badly this guy was stabbed and stuff. And that also made YouTube some of the people who recorded what happened when the guy comes out of the house finally, and is like a Michael Myers thing. He comes out of the house with this big butcher knife to the police officers, holding it up in an aggressive manner. And we were able to get, I had my tactical officers there who were covered in with long guns, so the patrol officers got close enough, and two of them with tasers were able to hit him with tasers and take him down, take him into custody. All of this was captured on YouTube, so it's out there. But that was a pretty interesting case, and a really good use of that body camera that we were able to look over and use that. So, and nowadays, you get people who make complaints against officers, and we were able to look at that body camera footage, the camera car footage, and it really helps the police officers a lot to be able to say, yeah, this is what really happened, this is the guy's complaint, that's not what I did, and here's the camera footage. So that's been really a good thing in my opinion. When I went through Reconstruction school, we started talking about the handling of the bodies and things like that. And one of my instructors was pretty adamant about this. He said, listen, you guys have to find that switch that you can turn on and off and understand that this body is a piece of evidence, and you got to treat it as such. If you get emotionally involved, this job's going to tear you up. It's going to tear up your family. So I had to, I believe that wholeheartedly, what he told me, and I used that. And I always, when I would get home from work, I always, my wife would say, hey, how was shift? What happened last night? And a lot of times I would say, oh, it was fine. And I wouldn't tell her things. Well, she'd see things on the news and such, and I would say, yeah, that's my case, whatever. Well, I thought you said nothing happened. I said, I don't want to bring this stuff home to you. It's bad enough that I work the night shift, and we got kids, and I work holidays and weekends, and I work part-time jobs and do all this. I don't want to bring all these bad stories home too. If it's a funny story or whatever, yeah, first thing I'll do is tell her what happened. But those things I always tried to, when I was off, I tried to compartmentalize that. I tried to keep that as just not think about it. I'll wait till my next shift if I'm still working a case or whatever, and not think about it too much. Try not to dwell on it. Just picture this as evidence. Even though it's a body, you got to treat it as evidence and separate yourself. Yeah, I had 15 years on with the city of Fulton. It was at the time I was a detective lieutenant. And I had a total of about 30 years on, just shy of 30 years in Illinois law enforcement at that time. And, I started looking at my pension and I became aware of an opening with the Scott County Sheriff's Department where they were looking for 3 court security / bailiff / prisoner transport officers. And it was a nice Monday through Friday gig, day shift. So I was pretty interested in that, which would allow me to retire, pull my pension from Illinois and work in Iowa and double dip, if you will. And so I had applied for that position. Well, in the meantime, the city of Fulton had sent me to Gatlinburg, Tennessee for training. And I told the chief before I had left, I was very upfront and honest. I said, I want you to know what's going on. I'm going to Gatlinburg for this training, and I'm expecting potentially a call from Scott County. I just didn't want this to be a surprise, And he said, no, that's fine. You go to the training. If it happens, it happens, and that's what we'll cover. And sure enough, as I was in Gatlinburg for the training, I got the call from Scott County that I had finished number 1, and they were offering me the position. So I went ahead. Once I came back from the training, I immediately put in my, I gave my notice, but I had months of time on the books that I had to use up. So I literally came back and started cleaning out my office. And the city administrator at that time was not a real happy camper with me. The chief thought it was awesome, and he was very supportive. And I retired from the Illinois side and started working on the Iowa side. Well, I had just shy of 5 years on, but I was in my 60s at this point, and my body's just not taking things the way it was. I blew out my left shoulder on the job. I broke my right wrist. I've got rheumatoid arthritis, and here I am still doing things like ground fighting with these 30-year-old deputies, and having to do this kind of training and stuff. And my body was telling me it's probably time to leave at that point. And I also had doing a couple of side jobs. I'd gotten hired by a law firm to do investigations for them on the Illinois side. And I really enjoyed that job. So I still was getting to do my investigation stuff in the Illinois side while I was working this job. Plus I was teaching concealed carry classes in Illinois. And I made had a really good business going with that. And so I was really busy, and just my body was telling me it's probably time to go. So I wound up retiring, completely retiring, and we always wanted to get out of Illinois, or Hellinois as I like to refer to it, and move to Tennessee.
What do you miss the most about the job?
Interview and interrogations. I got pretty good at it, and it got to the point where if I knew I had an interrogation to do, and I missed the reconstructions too, but if I had an interrogation to do on a case, a serious case, a child sex assault, something like that, I would lay awake the whole night before that interview plotting my strategy. I couldn't turn my brain off. I would just lay there all night. Do I want to come at this guy heavy and hard, or do I want to ease into this? Do I want to try to get to be friends with this guy? How do I want to approach this? So different personalities of the people I was going to interview sometimes dictated that, and that's how I would choose my approach. I didn't do them all the same. Just some people took a different approach than others, and you started, figuring out people's personalities and how you're going to apply that to your interview or interrogation. And man, I lived for that stuff, and I'd be just psyched up for it, because getting that confession was everything. It just, especially on the child predators, I was really wanted to go after those guys. Well, right now I'm really not doing anything, but I've got some, I was doing the investigations for the law firm before we moved down here. I got a awesome letter of recommendation from that law firm that I'm gonna maybe hit some of the local law firms and stuff and see if they'd be interested in me doing some work. I'm looking at maybe go to work part-time at a gun store. Still love guns and shooting. Just we've been settling in and trying to get the house all set where we want it, and so right now I'm really doing nothing, just kind of trying to figure out what it is I want to do. When I first started getting into law enforcement, I was just gung-ho about getting the job. I didn't really care where. I just wanted to get hired and get to work and start get that career started. Now, if I knew then what I know now, I would have planned things a little differently. I would have looked more at departments and pay scales and retirement pensions and insurance, things like that you find out is actually just as important as getting hired to begin with. So I had a couple of opportunities. I was offered a job with Peoria County Sheriff's Department full-time after I had started at Rock Island County, and that's the area where I grew up. And the sheriff himself had called me and offered me the position based on, he had some lieutenants that knew that I was a reserve and knew of me and that I had gone on to Rock Island County, and they had told him that he should try to get me to come back and take a position, and he called and offered it. And boy, that was a tough one to turn down, but it was, to start off with, it was going to be a $10,000 a year cut in pay. And I kind of regret that, and I also regret not going to the Illinois State Police, knowing what I know now, or even going to the Iowa side sooner. I think Iowa fosters a better level of supporting their officers than Illinois side. And my oldest son is a Davenport, Iowa police officer. And when he was got out of the military and was wanting to get into law enforcement, I kind of steered him that way. Hey, go look on the Iowa side. And that's where he wound up getting employed. So my wife tries desperately to talk the other boys out of going into law enforcement. She understands that I love my career, and it's the only thing I really knew how to do. And but she didn't want her kids to follow suit. The first one too late, he already went in, but she was successfully talked the other boys out of doing it. And it's just things, just be more, gets more knowledge of how your career will go, how it will be supported, and the benefits that you'll get in the end. That's important.
Donnie, I want to thank you. Some incredible stories. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I've had a good time too. And you guys contacted me, and I thought, yeah, that sounds like something. I still love talking about my career. I did meet a retired Maryville, Tennessee police officer that lives close to us, and it's a female. She was the first female Maryville police officer, and she loves that she can talk shop with me, because people don't understand that, haven't been in this job. You know what I mean. And you want to talk shop with somebody who knows the kind of things that you've experienced and you've had to dealt with, the good and the bad and the ugly. And it's just it's nice to have somebody you can talk to. So when you guys got a hold of me, I was like, yeah, I think that'll be fun. Yeah, I'd like to do that.